The gas station. It was supposed to be a quick stop, just a late-night refill at the gas station off the highway before heading home. I'd taken this route a dozen times before, but something about that night felt different. The air was unnaturally still, the kind of quiet that makes you feel like you're being watched. The station's lone fluorescent light flickered, casting uneven shadows across the empty lot. I pulled into the only open pump, killed the engine, and stepped out. The chill in the air raised goosebumps on my arms, though it wasn't particularly cold. I glanced around. The place was deserted. Even the attendant's booth was empty, its lights off. As I reached for the pump, I noticed a figure standing near the edge of the lot. He was tall, his silhouette barely illuminated by the weak light. He wasn't moving, just standing there, staring in my direction. Or at least I thought he was. His face was obscured by a shadow cast by his wide-brimmed hat. "Hey, you okay?" I called out. No response. I turned back to the pump, trying to shake the unease creeping up my spine. When I glanced back a second later, he was gone. After filling my tank, I decided to head inside to grab a coffee for the drive. But the convenience store's door wouldn't budge. I peered through the glass, knocking lightly. The store looked empty. Shelves of snacks and drinks lined the walls, but the counter was unmanned, and the cash register sat idle. That's when I noticed the handwritten sign taped to the inside of the door. "Do not come in after midnight. Do not look for me." My chest tightened. I stepped back, scanning the lot. It was still empty, eerily silent, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. Back in my car, I turned the key, and the engine roared to life. The radio came on, blaring static instead of music. I fiddled with the dial, trying to find a station, but all I got was the same hissing white noise. Then faintly, a voice cut through the static. "Don't leave." I froze, my hand hovering over the volume knob. "He's watching." The static swallowed the voice before I could process what I'd heard. I looked up at the lot, and there he was again, the man with the hat. This time, he was closer, standing by the edge of the gas station building. Panic set in. I shifted into drive, tires screeching as I sped out of the lot. The road stretched ahead of me, dark and empty, but my rearview mirror told a different story. The man was following me. He wasn't running, he didn't need to. His stride was impossibly long, each step closing the gap between us no matter how fast I drove. I pressed harder on the gas, my knuckles white on the steering wheel. The headlights illuminated the road ahead, but the darkness seemed thicker, almost alive, swallowing the light as quickly as it appeared. The GPS on my dashboard blinked, rerouting me without warning. "Turn left in 500 feet, the robotic voice instructed. There was no left turn, just an overgrown dirt path barely visible through the trees. "Turn left," the GPS repeated, more insistent. Against all logic, I did. The dirt road was rough and narrow, branches scraping against the sides of my car. The headlights struggled to cut through the dense forest, and the feeling of being watched returned, stronger than ever. The road ended abruptly at a clearing. At its center was a small, dilapidated cabin, its windows dark and its roof sagging under the weight of years. The GPS chimed one final time. "You have arrived." I didn't want to get out, but something compelled me to. The same force that had guided me down the road now urged me toward the cabin. The door creaked open before I could touch it, revealing a single room lit by a flickering oil lamp. In the center of the room was a table. On it lay a stack of Polaroid photos. I picked up the top photo, my hands trembling. It was a picture of the gas station, taken from my perspective. The next photo showed me at the pump, glancing over my shoulder. Each photo documented my night, down to the moment I entered the cabin. The final photo showed me holding the stack of pictures, staring at the camera in the corner of the room. I spun around, searching for the camera. There was nothing there, just shadows that seemed to shift and breathe. My phone buzzed in my pocket, breaking the silence. The screen displayed an unknown number, but I answered anyway, desperate for a human voice. "Hello," a low, raspy voice replied. "Did you see him?" "Who? What's going on?" I demanded. The voice chuckled, a sound that made my blood run cold. "He's right behind you." I turned, and there he was, the man with the hat, standing in the doorway. He stepped inside, his presence sucking the air from the room. His face was still hidden, but I could feel his gaze, cold and unrelenting. I backed away, my hands searching for anything I could use to defend myself. But the room was empty, save for the table and the photos. He raised a hand, long and skeletal, and pointed at the table. I looked down and saw a new photo, a picture of me, sitting in the cabin, staring blankly at the camera. I don't remember leaving the cabin. When I came to, I was back at the gas station, sitting in my car. The sun hadn't risen, and the lot was as empty as before. I glanced at the clock on my dashboard. 11:59 p.m. I stepped out of the car, my legs trembling, and walked to the attendant's booth. The sign on the door was gone, replaced by something else. "Welcome back." The man with the hat was standing by the pump, waiting. The next morning, the gas station was found abandoned. My car was still there, but I was nowhere to be seen. Locals claimed they saw someone fitting my description walking down the highway late that night. But the cameras told a different story. The footage showed me standing at the pump, staring at the man with the hat, frozen in place. At 11:59 p.m., the screen went black. I never left the gas station, but something took my place. And now, when travelers stop late at night, they say they see me standing at the pump, staring back at them, waiting. The subway's last train. I've always taken the subway to get home, even late at night. Something about the rhythmic hum of the train against the tracks feels comforting, almost hypnotic. But that night was different. That night, I caught the last train, a decision I'll regret for the rest of my life. The station was nearly empty when I arrived. The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly, casting a cold, sterile glow over the graffiti-covered walls. I checked my watch, 12:47 a.m. The final train was due any second. I sat on the lone bench, trying to ignore the oppressive silence of the station. It wasn't just quiet, it was heavy, like the air itself was waiting for something. As the train screeched into the station, I noticed someone standing at the far end of the platform. He was tall and thin, dressed in a dark coat that seemed too heavy for the mild spring night. His face was obscured by the shadow of his hood, but I could feel his eyes on me. When the train doors opened, I stepped in, hoping he wouldn't follow. But of course he did. The train car was completely empty, which wasn't unusual for the last train of the night. What was unusual was how quiet it was. There was no hum of machinery, no announcements, not even the faint buzz of fluorescent lights. The stranger sat at the opposite end of the car, his hood still hiding his face. He didn't move, didn't look away, but I could feel his gaze drilling into me. I tried to focus on my phone, but there was no signal. No Wi-Fi, no bars, just the no-service message staring back at me. The train rattled along, and the first stop came and went. Then the next, and the next. But no one got on. No one got off. The train wasn't stopping for long, either, just a brief, eerie pause before lurching forward again. I glanced at the route map above the doors. None of the station names were familiar. In fact, they didn't even look like real words. The stranger was still there, sitting perfectly still. But now he was closer, just a few seats away. The overhead lights flickered, plunging the car into intermittent darkness. Each time they came back on, the stranger was closer. First, he was 2 seats away, then 1. When the lights went out a third time, I felt a weight settle beside me. My breath caught in my throat. Slowly, I turned my head. He was sitting next to me now, his face inches from mine. It was pale, almost translucent, with hollow eyes that seemed to pull me in. "Do you know where this train goes?" His voice was low and hollow, like it came from deep within his chest. I shook my head, unable to speak. "Neither do I," he said. "But you'll find out soon." The lights flickered again, and he was gone. The train sped up, the motion becoming rough and uneven. I looked out the window, but all I could see was darkness. No tunnel walls, no lights, just an endless void. I tried to pull the emergency brake, but it didn't budge. The intercom crackled to life, and a distorted voice whispered, "You shouldn't have boarded." The train lurched violently, throwing me to the floor. The windows shattered, and the car was filled with a deafening roar. When I looked up, the car was full. Men, women, and children sat in the seats, their faces blank and expressionless. Their eyes were all wrong, cloudy and lifeless, staring straight ahead. None of them moved, except for their heads, which turned in unison to look at me. "It's your stop," one of them whispered, their voice overlapping with dozens of others. The train screeched to a halt, and the doors opened to reveal a station I'd never seen before. It was massive, the platform stretching into the darkness. The walls were covered in strange symbols that seemed to writhe and shift when I looked at them. The ghostly passengers began to file out, moving like puppets on strings. I tried to stay on the train, but an unseen force pulled me to my feet and dragged me onto the platform. There was a clock on the wall, its hands frozen at 12:47. I turned to look at the train, but it was gone. The platform stretched endlessly in both directions, and the oppressive silence returned. The symbols on the walls pulsed faintly, casting an unnatural glow. The air was thick, making it hard to breathe. "Welcome," a voice whispered behind me. I turned to see the stranger standing there, his face fully visible now. It was mine. Not a reflection, not a doppelganger, me. But his expression was cold, empty, and his eyes were those same hollow voids. "You've taken my place," he said, his lips curling into a smile. Before I could respond, he stepped back into the shadows and disappeared. I don't know how long I've been here. The clock still says 12:47, and the train hasn't come back. The platform isn't empty anymore, though. More people have arrived, others like me, confused and scared, waiting for a train that never comes. But now I understand. The train wasn't taking us somewhere. It was leaving us here, in this place, forever. And I can feel it, the moment when someone else will board the last train, just like I did. When they arrive, I'll take the stranger's place, and they'll take mine. Because that's how it works. And I'll be waiting for them,